A few days ago on the 17th, Sargon of Akkad uploaded a sit-down video conference he had with purported anti-racism activist Saira Rao, a conference meant to look at differences in each other's points of view on the politics and history of race, and how those distinctions inform their opinions differently regarding activism and social justice. I personally found the deliberation to be quite intriguing, although I was disappointed by its joltingly abrupt conclusion. After watching this video, I wanted to throw together a brief response reflecting on and answering some of the more curious moments in the interview, and examining elements of each side's model in greater detail than is exposited in the source. Before we get started, I'm inclined to state for the record that I'm proud of these two individuals for agreeing to come together of their own volition to attempt an open and honest dialogue. Regardless of any results, the pursuit of civil engagement and open-mindedness towards different points of view is something that I believe is always worth celebrating.
It feels, when I was running for Congress last year, the woman I was running against, who's now a 12-term incumbent, Democrat, white, liberal lady in Denver, kept whispering, Saira Rao is starting a race war. I mean, that would be incredibly hubristic of me to say that I have started a race war. That's what I'm talking about. The race war has been going on, but it has been white people doing all those things that you just ticked off on my tweet. And now it feels to white folks like there's a war, but the race war has been going on. They just happen to not be winning every second because we're calling them out. We are not letting them win at every single turn. So that's what I meant by that tweet.
Right, because so that seems to be a huge series of statements to me, and I mean,
what do you take issue with?
That it just seems to be a mischaracterization of what's gone on and a kind of totalizing of the narrative that's being presented, to demonize white people as if what they have done in the past is unique, and I don't believe that it has been. So I find that kind of strange. And I don't think that white people currently think that they're fighting a race war. So when you say that, there's a race war that's been going on for centuries and now that you're losing it, you're concerned. I don't think that they considered themselves to be fighting any kind of war. So I guess, yeah, so the whole tweet to me is just, I mean, it just doesn't fit into a worldview that I'm familiar with.
I feel like what Sargon is trying to say here is that there's a great dissimilarity between he and Saira concerning the role that race plays in their respective personal identities. The worldview that Sargon concedes he is not familiar with here is presumably the one in which you are a racial minority in your home country. And unfortunately, I cannot speak to this experience directly, but I believe that growing up as a racial minority is one culprit in the archetype of what we shall call the ethnic identitarian. Another element is a form of conditioning, that is, nurturing, of the idea that your ethnicity is a meaningful part of who you are. While at face value this concept may appear harmless and perhaps even unavoidable, it inevitably factionalizes us as human beings based on what might otherwise be a characteristic as trivial as appearance. Might. Now, I do not ascribe to the ethnic identitarian archetype, and I presume that Sargon doesn't either, because when he talks about himself, who he is, and what he believes, he doesn't focus on his race the way someone like Richard Spencer would. And there are multiple reasons for this. As I mentioned before, there is the element of conditioning that cultivates ethnicity as a part of your identity. I can personally attest that I did not experience this conditioning growing up because, quite simply, I did not grow up in the company of many racist people, if at all. I wasn't taught to treat people differently or think of people differently because of their race, even though there were people in my life whose skin color was different from mine. I also learned how to create cultural connections with people on the basis of something other than our mutual ethnicity. It legitimately saddens me to say this, but what we can take away from Saira's worldview and everything she's saying here is that she was not raised this way. She was raised being told, either consciously or unconsciously, that race matters, and that it matters quite a bit. That it is not only a part of who you are, but that it is a consequential part of who you are, and affects your personal worth as an individual. She all but confirms this over the course of the discussion.
I'll give you a quote. A friend of mine growing up, Indian dude in Richmond, Virginia. So I grew up in the capital of the Confederacy a little bit more than 100 years after slavery ended, right? Yeah. So he would get brutalized at school. He was called everything in the book. We all were, right? But yeah. He had other things going on. But I remember him specifically saying, at least we're not black. Okay? At least we're not black.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
So anti-blackness is the benchmark of everything. So for me to say that I'm not anti-black is intellectually dishonest. I am anti-black because I was raised anti-black. You can't change anything. You can't dismantle systems of oppression until you acknowledge it. So what does that mean for me? I check myself every day. I think about this stuff every day. I tweet about this stuff every day. I have meetings with lots of black and brown and white people talking about this, but it would be incredibly hypocritical for me to point my finger at white people and saying, you guys are white supremacists without checking my own anti-blackness. Why can't you do that?
Because I literally wasn't taught to see the world that way. It's as simple as that. I wasn't taught a worldview like that, and I've not been conditioned to hold ethnic identitarian principles. People like Sargon and I are individualists, and as such, the idea that race is significant or undivorceable from our conscious thoughts is rejected outright. This actually seems to be something that many leftists are unable to understand, despite the fact that it manifests all the time. What's something Brandon Tatum and I have in common? Not our skin color, but we are both pro-gun. What's something that Thomas Sowell and I have in common? Not our skin color, but we both value free markets. The culture of the United States manifests in all sorts of different ways. National holidays, our government, our history, classically liberal ideals like property ownership and free speech. And I've said this before. You could make the argument that these ideas all came from white people because the skin color of the people that thought them up and wrote them down was mostly white. But the idea that there is a white race that owns the right to this culture is ridiculous and ignorant. A conglomeration of ethnicities loosely related by skin pigmentation cannot and does not own the culture of a nation. Rather, the nation's citizenry does. But just for a moment, imagine what a nightmare it must be to live Saira Rao's reality. Imagine being taught that the degree to which a behavior or concept is right or wrong depends on the race of the person to which it is attached. Imagine growing up and being told that your value as a human being is affected by something completely beyond your control, and that this is something you will never be able to overcome no matter how hard you try. That is a terrifying form of psychological slavery.
I don't believe we have a democracy.
Right.
We don't have a democracy. Our democracy is a farce. It's a total farce. So elections are bought and sold. Companies buy elections.
Yeah, you mean influence in the media, right?
It's not just influencing the media. Companies pay. Look, like our greatest Democrats. Go look at where go look who's funding Nancy Pelosi's campaigns. Go look at who's funding Elizabeth Warren and Diana DeGette, the woman that I ran against. Pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, and on the other side, it's the NRA, the gun lobbies. They're getting these people elected, and then they're beholden to these people. So that's what I mean.
Okay, but before we jump on there, because I mean, getting these people elected, what they're surely doing is giving them money to be able to influence the media. I mean, they're not simply like buying votes, raw votes.
But I disagree on that.
Okay, this will be a shorter point to look at. Obviously, or perhaps empirically you could say, large corporations wield a lot of power in America because they have capital. But there is a very clear distinction between buying votes and buying press, and as we'll see, Sargon attempts to make this distinction himself later on in the video.
They still can't force the voters to vote for the candidate. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm totally against like the corporate side of the Democrat and Republican parties. I think that they're atrocious and people should vote against them. I mean, I've never taken any corporate money myself, and I'm just a YouTuber, but I don't do that on principle. So I completely agree that they are buying candidates, but I don't agree that that's the same as buying the democracy, because people still have to vote for the candidates.
The reason I'm driving this distinction home is not because it's important that Saira understand the difference between these, but because it implies a lot under the hood with the way she, in general, forms her opinions and arrives at conclusions. What do I mean by this? Well, she disagrees with the notion that funding campaigns is distinct from buying votes, which must mean that she believes a person's decision on who or what to vote for is affected only by the amount of exposure they have to an idea. I think we'll all agree that people who can afford more advertising do get more exposure. That is, they're more visible. But that does not necessarily make them more electable, because people retain the freedom to vote for whomever they want. It is telling that someone aligned politically left does not understand this, because you'll notice this recurring sort of mentality that if you repeat something incorrect multiple times in all caps, that somehow that makes it less incorrect or less rationally indefensible. But that's not the way that things work. The truth is, a fundamentally flawed argument made 1,000 times is always going to be less valid than a correct argument made once. It doesn't matter how many times you say something as long as it's untrue. What matters is that what you've said is true and that you're able to demonstrate that it's true using logic and reason.
You yourself said it. I'm demonizing white people. It's white people get so upset when you call them white.
Yeah. And
black people have been called black their whole lives. I've been called brown. I've been called Paki. I've been called Indian. I've been called this. I'm used to it. Like, that's what I am, right? So white people have never, it's only again recently where by and large, lots of people are referring to white people as what they are, white people, and it makes them go crazy.
Okay, but I mean, can you not see that the two wrongs don't make a right argument there?
I'm very happy to be called brown. I am brown. This whole notion of colorblind society is racist. How can you be colorblind?
Oh my god, this poor woman. Okay, so we're swinging wide here and coming back around to a conversation about the difference between Saira and Sargon and their perception of racism. And see, this is what happens when half of your society is able to move past the evil of racism and the other half is still suffering PTSD from it. For now, it suffices to say that the root of racism's evil is that it compels us to simplify people to the point at which we no longer treat them as individuals. And we can see how that has been so ingrained in Saira Rao's worldview that she has internalized the racism inflicted on her and is now guilty of simplifying herself. That internalization manifests in statements such as these. I'm very happy to be called brown. I am brown. But that's not the full story. On the subject of colorblindness, she is, to a point, actually correct. How can you be colorblind? The answer is that we can't literally be colorblind. That would require us to brainwash ourselves into not understanding the cosmetic distinctions between races. But we already know that race and/or skin color play different roles for these two individuals, and this is the reason that probably my favorite exchange from this entire video is when Saira asks, "Do you find the term white people to be offensive?" To which Sargon replies, "I find it to be descriptive."
Do you find the term white people to be offensive?
Well, I find it to be descriptive. So
that's not what I do. I said, do you find it offensive?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I don't find it offensive in a context of describing statistics or something like that, or even, I mean, I wouldn't. I think it's inaccurate at very best. I don't think that you can.
White? Are you white? And are you a person?
Well, I don't really consider myself to be white as a part of an identity. No.
Sargon emphasizes that being white-skinned is something that describes him, but not something that defines him. The use of white people in the context of describing him therefore does not bother him. Using it to define him, on the other hand, is intrinsically reductive of who he is as an individual. And as I established previously, this is what racism is fundamentally about. I hope that you can all see then that Saira's conflation of being brown-skinned with who she is personally, politically, and culturally is ultimately harmful.
You're a man.
I'm definitely oppressing women then, aren't I?
You are institutional.
Institutional.
Yes.
I'm not part of an institution though.
You're part of the white male institution. I mean, I don't know why this is so confusing.
Well, I don't believe there is an institution called white male. That's the difference. I don't think that. I mean, for example, my country is currently being run by women, so.
Okay.
Well, we've got a Scottish chancellor who's a woman.
No, we had a black president, so there's no more racism.
Well, no, Prime Minister who's a woman, leader of the Welsh Assembly is a woman. So I mean, like the highest, and the Queen is a woman, obviously. So and Europe is basically ruled by women. So I don't feel like I have any institutional power as a white man. That's I mean I'm obviously this
that might be the greatest quote of all time. I don't feel like I have institutional power as a white man. Okay.
Well, all the institutions seem to be ruled over by women. So,
okay.
Well, so does this make me oppressed?
Oh my God. I can't even answer that.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But see, Sargon's application of progressive logic here is pretty sound. If his identity is defined by being a straight white male, then it would follow that he really doesn't have much institutional power in his home country right now. And the reason that this gives pause to Saira here is because it is correct logically, but not rhetorically. This is, in the realm of computer programming, what is colloquially known as the segmentation fault. And to linger on this simple yet foundational break in logical consistency, the entire doctrine of the progressive left risks total collapse.
I can't even.
Hang on. Let me explain, right? Because let me explain. But it's like because I think.
Okay, I actually have to go.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Okay, sorry. Okay, well, I'm pretty sure I was correct there.
And that's pretty much all she wrote. Anyway, that's the gist. At this point, it seems like the left's ideology is powered by outrage, emotional appeal, and misrepresentation, and is protected by keeping any dialogue up in the air. And they will retreat from debate because they realize it's only a matter of time before their ideas are picked apart. That's why there's never any resolution in conversations like these. So where do we go from here? Honestly, I really can't say. But regardless, I think Sargon represented himself in a cordial and composed manner and never allowed himself to get discouraged, and that seems to be a definitive step in the right direction.